In the fall of that year, 58-year-old former logger and trapper Walter H. had been living alone on a remote stretch of the upper Nechako River in the interior of British Columbia for the better part of 8 years. He had gone there after burying his wife, wanting nothing from the world but silence and distance. And for 8 years, that was all the country gave him. Then, one warm evening in early June, something came down out of the timber to the water's edge that should not have existed. He watched it drink from his river, and it spoke to him. What happened over the 4 months that followed, he has never told another living soul. And by his own account, he set it down only because he was asked to, at the end, by the one who taught him. He has no photograph and no film. He offers no proof at all. He asks only that you hear him out. This is his account in his own words. His name has been changed at his request. I've been living by myself on a stretch of river in the interior of British Columbia for about 8 years now. The land is 60 acres of thick timber, spruce and pine, and old cottonwood, with a wide bend in the river cutting along the western edge. I bought the place after my wife died, when the city and the noise and the well-meaning people had all become more than I could stand. The closest town sits about 22 miles off, down a logging road that washes into gravel and ruts every spring when the melt comes down. That suits me fine. No neighbors leaning over a fence, no traffic, just me and the water and the mountains behind it. The house isn't much to look at. It's a squat log place with 2 rooms, a wood stove that eats through a cord a week in January, and a generator I only run when I have to. I trap and hunt for most of my meat, pull grayling and whitefish out of the river when the season's right, and keep a rough garden in the one patch of ground that gets enough sun. It's a plain kind of life, the kind that makes you thankful for small things like dry firewood and a cup of coffee that's still hot. I came out here because I wanted to be left alone, wanted the quiet to swallow me up. And for 8 years, that's what I had. I saw moose almost every week, black bears in the berry season, once a wolverine crossing the gravel bar at dawn. But I never felt like anything out there meant me harm. I knew that country the way you know your own hands, every game trail, every eddy in the river, every draw where the moose like to yard up in winter. All of that came apart about 4 months ago. It was a warm evening in early June, and I was standing at the edge of my yard with a mug of coffee, watching the light go soft and gold over the far ridge. The river was running low and clear, throwing back the color of the sky. I remember thinking it was one of those evenings you can't arrange or ask for. It just arrives, and all you can do is stand in it. Then I caught movement down on the far gravel bar, maybe 250 yards off. My first thought was a person, because whatever it was stood on 2 legs and moved upright. But the way the Bigfoot walked was wrong for a man. The Bigfoot was far too tall, far too broad through the shoulders, and it moved with this long, rolling stride that no person has ever walked with. I set my coffee on the rail and squinted, trying to make sense of it. The Bigfoot was working its way down toward the water along the bar. My first real thought was that some hiker had lost the trail and wandered onto my ground. It happens now and then, even this far out. But this was nothing like a lost hiker. The Bigfoot had to be 7 feet tall at the least, maybe more than that. And it was heavy through the frame, not soft heavy, but built, like a man who'd spent 30 years swinging an axe. I went inside and took my rifle down from the pegs above the door. It's an old bolt action, nothing special, but I keep it loaded because out here you never know. I wasn't planning on shooting a soul. But if somebody was on my land, I wanted to have it in my hands. I'd had run-ins with poachers before, men who figure a place this remote is theirs to do as they please. I went down toward the river, slow and quiet, keeping to the willows. I've spent enough years in that country to know how to move without cracking every branch underfoot. The Bigfoot was still going when I set out, angling for the water's edge. I kept my distance, using the brush and the cut of the bank to stay out of sight. As I got in closer, maybe 80 yards out, I started to really see it, and that's when my mind began fighting with what my eyes were telling me. The Bigfoot wore nothing at all. It was covered head to foot in dark hair, thick and coarse, the color of wet bark. Its shoulders were wider than any man's had a right to be. And when it reached down and shoved a deadfall log aside like it weighed nothing, I saw an arm thick as my thigh. My pulse started hammering. This was no man. And it was no bear either. I've watched plenty of bears, and none of them stand and walk like that, with that kind of purpose and balance in every step. The Bigfoot moved like something that belonged to that country, something that had been walking there long before I ever came, long before anyone. The Bigfoot reached the shallows and stopped. For a while, it only stood there looking out across the moving water. Then it lowered itself down onto one knee, easing that huge body toward the ground. It leaned forward, cupped two enormous hands in the current, and lifted the water to its mouth to drink. I was frozen behind a leaning cottonwood, maybe 45 yards back. My rifle was still in my grip, but I'd forgotten it was there. I was too busy trying to fit what I was seeing into a world that made sense. This was a Bigfoot, a real one, the thing men spend whole lifetimes chasing, the thing that's supposed to be a fireside story and nothing more. And it was right there in front of me, drinking from my river like it was the most ordinary thing on earth. Then the Bigfoot spoke. The voice was low, lower than any human voice I've ever stood near. It came rolling up out of that great chest and carried clean across the water. 3 words, plain as anything. In English I couldn't mistake. I see you. The cold went straight through me. The Bigfoot hadn't turned, hadn't so much as glanced back my way. It was still crouched at the water's edge. But somehow it knew exactly where I was. Then 2 more words. Be still. My mind went white. Every instinct in me was screaming to run, to get clear of that place and never come back. But my legs wouldn't answer. I was rooted where I stood, rifle sweating in my hands, staring at a thing that shouldn't exist and had no business speaking my language. The Bigfoot stood, slow, water running off those hands. Then it turned and looked straight at me. I've turned that moment over in my head 1,000 times since, trying to find the words for what I saw in the Bigfoot's face. If you'd asked me the day before what a Bigfoot's face would look like, I'd have said something like a gorilla, animal eyes, all threat and bared teeth. That's not what looked back at me. The face was nothing I could have dreamed up. A flat, wide nose, a heavy ridge over the brow, a jaw that came forward. The eyes were dark, near black, and they were fixed on me with what I can only call a quiet curiosity. No anger in it, no threat, only attention. The Bigfoot knew I was there, and it was waiting to see what I'd do. My hands were shaking so hard I had to lower the rifle before I dropped it in the rocks. I was trying to decide whether to run or shoot or just stand there like a fool when the Bigfoot did the thing that changed all of it. The Bigfoot sat down. Just like that, it lowered that enormous body onto the gravel and folded those tree trunk legs beneath it. Then it lifted one hand and pointed at me. Then it pointed at the ground in front of where it sat. The meaning was plain enough. Sit. I can't tell you why I did it. Maybe shock, maybe the same pull of curiosity, or maybe some cornered part of my brain worked out that if this thing had wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. But I stepped out from behind that cottonwood, my legs gone to water under me, and I sat down on the gravel about 12 feet from it. We looked at each other. I'm not stretching it when I say we must have sat like that for 5 whole minutes, neither of us moving or speaking, just holding each other's eyes. The Bigfoot's gaze never once left mine, and I found I couldn't turn away from it. It was like being read, like the Bigfoot was taking in something about my face, my breathing, the way I was holding myself. At last I found a voice, barely more than a breath. I asked how it knew how to talk. The Bigfoot tipped that massive head a little to one side like it was weighing the question. Then it spoke again in that same deep, grinding voice. I hear, I learn. 2 words of meaning, but they were enough. The Bigfoot had learned by listening, by watching men from the shadows and taking their words a piece at a time over the years. How long had it been doing that? How many people had it stood near without a single one of them ever knowing? I tried a few more questions, but the Bigfoot only went back to watching me. After another minute or 2, it rose to its feet. It was even more of a thing standing up. I'm 6 foot even, and it had 1.5 feet on me at least, likely more. It looked down at me a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the timber, slipping between the trunks, with a grace that had no business belonging to something that size. And then it was gone. I stayed sitting on that gravel bar for another 20 minutes, trying to talk myself into believing what had just happened. My hands were still shaking when I finally got up and walked back to the house. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the step with the rifle across my knees, staring into the dark and wondering if the Bigfoot would come back. 4 days went by before I saw it again. I'd spent those days wound tight as a spring, flinching at every snapped twig, checking the tree line every few minutes. Part of me had decided I'd finally gone strange from too many winters alone, that I'd dreamed the whole thing. But I knew what I'd seen, I knew what I'd heard. On the 4th day, I was down by the river at first light, working a line in the slow water below the bend where the grayling hold. It was that early kind of quiet that makes you feel like the last man on earth. I had my eyes on the drift when I heard something move on the bank behind me. I turned and nearly went over into the shallows. The Bigfoot stood at the edge of the willows, maybe 30 feet off, just watching me. It must have been there a while because I hadn't heard a thing. For all that size, the Bigfoot had come up on me without a sound. My heart was going hard, but it wasn't the same terror as the first time. The Bigfoot wasn't crowding me, wasn't moving in or making any move that read as a threat. It was simply standing there, watching, like it was waiting on something. I got to my feet slow, careful not to jerk. I lifted one open hand, the closest thing I had to a sign of peace. The Bigfoot watched me do it, then lifted one huge hand back at me, copying the gesture almost exactly. Then it spoke. "You catch food." I understood the Bigfoot was naming what I was doing. It approved of the fishing, or at the least, it grasped what I was after. I nodded, not knowing what else to do, and tipped my rod toward the water. I tried to say I was after supper, but the Bigfoot only kept those dark, knowing eyes on me. After a moment, it turned and started off along the bank, moving away from me. About 20 yards on, it stopped and looked back, plain as day, wanting me to come. I hung there a second, then figured if it meant to show me something, I might as well find out what. I followed the Bigfoot along the water for maybe a 1/4 mile. It went slow, stopping now and then to check I was still behind it. We came to a place where a side creek spilled into the river, backing up into a still green pool where the current gave out. The Bigfoot stopped and pointed into the water. At first, I couldn't make out what it wanted me to see. Then I caught them, fish, dozens of them, maybe more, stacked up in that quiet pool. Big ones too, bull-trout by the look of them, 3 and 4 pounds apiece. The Bigfoot had brought me to the finest fishing hole on the whole river, a spot I'd never once found in 8 years of living on it. I looked at the Bigfoot, amazed. It gave a single nod like it was satisfied I'd understood, then turned and walked back into the trees. That was the start of something I still can't fully get my head around. Over the next few weeks, the Bigfoot kept turning up, sometimes at the river, sometimes near the house. once square in the middle of the trail while I was hiking up to check a trap line. It never came in too close, never tried to touch me or come near the door, but it was plainly taken with me. And slowly, carefully, we began to talk. The Bigfoot's words were few, mostly one or two at a stretch, 3 if it was reaching for something harder. But what it lacked in words, it made up with its hands and its face. The Bigfoot was smart, far smarter than I'd ever have believed a thing like that could be. It followed ideas, held onto meanings, and it seemed to carry a deep, settled knowledge of that country and everything living in it. I started leaving food out now and then, dried meat, an apple, a heel of bread, setting it on a flat boulder at the edge of my clearing. The Bigfoot would take it, but it always left something back. Sometimes it was a plant I knew, yarrow or devil's club, the kind of thing you'd use on a wound. Sometimes it was something I didn't know at all, a root or a berry the Bigfoot would eat first in front of me, showing me it was safe. One morning I left out an old wool coat because I'd noticed the Bigfoot had a long torn gash down one forearm, likely from a scrap with another animal. The next day the coat was gone, and in its place sat a stone, a smooth gray river stone with a spiral worn into one side. So even in clean, I couldn't tell if the water had done it or a hand had. I've still got it on my windowsill. I don't know where the Bigfoot found it or why it thought that made an even trade, but I kept it all the same. The Bigfoot began teaching me things about that country, not with words, it didn't have enough of those, but by showing me. It taught me which plants would feed me and which would lay me flat. It showed me game trails I'd walked past 100 times without seeing. It took me to a set of caves back in a limestone bluff I'd never known was there, the mouths hidden behind a curtain of alder. Every time I thought I had the Bigfoot figured, it did something that turned me around again. It had a sense of humor, I mean it. One afternoon, I was walking a ridge trail and a green spruce cone came down and bounced off the top of my head. When I looked up, the Bigfoot was set on a limb above me, and I'll swear to my last day that it was grinning. It thought that was the funniest thing in the world. About 2 months on from that first evening, I began to see what the Bigfoot was really trying to put across. We were sitting by the river one evening, which had turned into a kind of habit. Me working a line while the Bigfoot watched from the bank, when a cow, moose, and her calf came down to drink on the far side. The Bigfoot pointed at them and said, "They eat, they live." I nodded, not sure where it was going. Then the Bigfoot pointed at me and said, "You eat, they die." I got it. The Bigfoot was talking about the old order of things, the way one life feeds off another. I tried to explain that I only took what I needed, that I never hunted for the sport of it or let anything go to waste. The Bigfoot seemed to already have hold of that because it nodded and said, "Good, that is right." Over the weeks that came after, the Bigfoot taught me more about that rightness, that balance. It showed me how everything in the country was tied to everything else, how each animal had its place. It showed me how too many moose would strip a valley bare, how the wolves and the bears kept the numbers from running away, how even a dead standing tree gave a home to more life than a living one. The Bigfoot saw that country in a way that went past anything I'd learned in a schoolroom or a book. It didn't see the forest as a heap of separate parts, trees over here, animals over there, water and dirt apart from both. It saw the whole of it as one living thing, every piece leaning on every other piece. And it counted people as part of that too, not standing outside of it. One day the Bigfoot took me to a cut about 7 miles off, where a company had come through some years back and taken the whole hillside down, leaving nothing but stumps and slash and long gray scars where the rain had carried the soil away. The Bigfoot stood at the edge of that ruin and said one word, "Wrong." The Bigfoot was angry. I could see it in the way those huge hands closed into fists, in the way the shoulders drew up. But it wasn't angry at me. It was angry at what had been done to that place, at the balance that had been torn apart. Then it led me maybe a mile on to a slope where an avalanche had come down years before and scoured everything off the mountain. But here the country was healing. Young trees were pushing up between the old shattered trunks. Fireweed ran purple across the whole face of it. Birds were everywhere, and there was moose sign all through the new growth. The Bigfoot pointed at that and said, "Snow break, then grow, right?" I understood. The slide was a natural thing, part of how that mountain worked. What the men had done with the cutting wasn't part of any cycle at all. The Bigfoot was showing me the line between wrecking a place and making room for it to come back. Between taking the whole of something and taking only your share. The strongest proof of how the Bigfoot understood that country came about 3 months into our strange partnership. I was walking back to the house one afternoon, cutting through a dense stretch of timber I didn't usually bother with. The way was choked with blowdown and thick brush, and I was working hard just to get through it. That's when I heard the sound. I stopped dead. It was a low, huffing grunt, off in the willows ahead of me, and then a crack of brush too heavy for a deer. I knew that sound. Grizzly. There are grizzlies all through those mountains, and mostly they want nothing to do with a man. But then I saw it, and I knew right away this one was different. The bear came out of the brush maybe 40 feet off, and it was in bad shape, ribs standing out through a poor summer coat. One side of its face scarred over where it had lost an eye. A hungry bear, and an old hurt one, the kind that stops being afraid of people because it's run out of easier ways to eat. It caught my scent and swung that big head toward me, and it didn't back off. It came forward, slow and low. I brought the rifle up, but I didn't want to fire. I'd spent 3 months learning from the Bigfoot about balance, about taking only what you need, about the order of things. Killing this bear for being starved and desperate felt wrong to the bone, but I wasn't about to stand there and let it take me either. The bear closed to 20 feet, ears going flat, and I could see it gathering to come. I was trying to pick my shot when a sound went up that turned my blood to ice water. It was a roar, deep and old and full of a fury I felt in my chest. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, rolling off the trees and shaking down through the ground. The bear heard it too. It stopped where it stood, every muscle locked, and swung its head toward the timber. Then the Bigfoot came. The Bigfoot came through the forest like a slide coming off a mountain, snapping deadfall and throwing brush aside. It rose to its full height, chest out, both arms up over its head, and it was a terrible thing to see. In that moment, I finally understood why every man who claims to have met a Bigfoot talks first about the fear. The Bigfoot loosed another roar, louder than the first, and it charged. The bear didn't hold. For all its size and all its hunger, it broke and ran, crashing off through the willows and gone. The Bigfoot pulled up about 10 feet from me, still tall, still scanning the trees, breathing in great heaves that I could see moving through its chest. It held like that for the better part of a minute, making sure the bear was truly gone. Then it came down out of that posture, dropped those huge arms, and looked at me. The whole face had changed. No more rage in it, only worry. The Bigfoot said, "You are safe." I was shaking all through, the fear coming out of me now that it was over. I tried to thank it and couldn't get my voice to work right. The Bigfoot seemed to understand anyway. It stepped over to me, and for the first time it put a hand on me. One enormous hand laid over my whole shoulder and half my chest, and just stood there a moment. Then it said a thing I'll carry the rest of my life. Bear must eat, you must live, both right. The Bigfoot was telling me the bear was only doing what a starving bear does, fighting to stay alive. And I was only doing what a man does, trying to stay alive too. Neither of us was in the wrong. The Bigfoot had only stepped in to make sure we could both go on doing what we had to without one of us ending the other. It walked me the whole way back to the house that day, keeping close. At the edge of the clearing, it stopped and looked at me one more time. It said, "Walk slow, look more." I promised I would. The Bigfoot nodded, satisfied, and melted back into the trees. After that day, something shifted between the Bigfoot and me. We'd gone past plain curiosity, past careful watching. The Bigfoot had saved my life, and that made a bond I couldn't put words to. The Bigfoot seemed to feel it as well, because it started spending more time around my place, coming by nearly every day. It taught me to move through the country the way it did, silent and easy, reading the ground for what it could tell me. It showed me how to set my feet on stone instead of dry needles, how to test the wind before I stepped into an opening, how to keep the cover between me and whatever I didn't want to see me. I tried to teach it a few things back, though I couldn't figure what a creature born to those woods could ever want from me. I showed it my generator one day, tried to lay out how the fuel turned into the light in my window. The Bigfoot seemed caught by it, though I doubt it followed much. It touched the machine with one huge, careful finger, then looked at me and said, "Fire that is not fire." I laughed at that. I suppose to a Bigfoot, a generator would look like fire with no flame. But then it struck me that from where the Bigfoot stood, near everything men make must look like some kind of trick. The Bigfoot lived without a scrap of it, getting by on knowledge and skill handed down through I don't know how many of its own kind. That got me wondering about the Bigfoot's life, about where it had come from. I tried asking if there were others, if it had family near. It was slow to answer, only shaking that great head at first. But in time it opened up a little. The Bigfoot said, "My kind, north, far away." I understood. Its people were somewhere far to the north. I asked if it missed them. The Bigfoot looked at me with those dark eyes, and I saw in them something close to grief. Alone, many winters. The Bigfoot had been on its own a long time. I didn't know the why of it, whether it had been driven off or had chosen to go. But I knew about being alone. That was the whole reason I'd come out to that river in the first place. I told the Bigfoot I was alone too, that I knew what it was talking about. It nodded, slow, and I think in that moment we truly saw each other as the same. Not man and Bigfoot, not two different creatures, but two beings who'd chosen to go apart from the world and found something like company in each other instead. In the back half of September, the melt-fed river had long since dropped, but a run of hard, warm rain came in off the coast and sat over the mountains for 3 days. I'd been listening to the forecast on my little wind-up radio and knew it was coming. They were calling for heavy rain on top of a snowpack that hadn't finished going out up high. I'd lived through high water before, but this had a bad sound to it. I spent a day getting ready, hauling everything loose up off the low ground, splitting extra wood, filling every jug I owned in case the water fouled my creek intake. The Bigfoot showed up that afternoon and watched me work. It was uneasy, pacing the edge of the clearing, looking off toward the mountains again and again. I asked if it was the storm that had it worried. The Bigfoot nodded and said, "Water comes, big, you go high." I told it I would. I asked if it had somewhere safe. It pointed up toward the limestone bluff and said, "Cave, dry." The rain came hard that night and didn't let up. By the second day, I could hear the river through the walls, a deep, steady roar it had never made before. I went out once to look and turned straight back. The bend had come up over the gravel bar and was climbing into the willows, brown and heavy, and dragging whole trees down with it. Somewhere upstream, an ice jam or a log jam must have let go, because the water didn't rise slow. It came in a surge. I was at the stove trying to keep my nerve when I felt it before I heard it, a shudder come up through the floor. Then a sound like the whole world tearing, and the near wall of the house buckled inward as the water hit it. The river had jumped its bank and come for the low corner where I sat. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed the rifle and the pack I keep ready by the door and went out into it. The water was already past my knees in the yard and pulling hard at my legs, cold enough to steal the breath out of me. Behind me, I heard the corner of the roof go, timbers snapping, the stovepipe coming down. I fought toward the higher ground at the back of the clearing, but the current had me, dragging me sideways toward the trees and the roaring dark past them. I went under once and came up with a mouthful of grit, my hand still locked on the pack strap for no reason I could name. I couldn't find the bottom. The water was carrying me now, and I knew with a flat, cold certainty that it was going to take me down into the river proper, and that would be the end of it. Then a sound cut through all the roar of it, a roar of another kind, deep and known to me now, calling. A hand closed around my arm, and I came clean up out of the water. The Bigfoot had waded into its chest against a current that would have rolled a truck, and it hauled me up against that great chest and turned for the high ground. One arm came under my legs, the other behind my back, and I was carried like a child again, only this time through black water instead of storm. The Bigfoot moved through that flood like it wasn't there, feeling out the bottom with each step, never once losing its feet where I'd have been swept off mine in an instant. I don't know how far it carried me. I only held on to the pack and the rifle and tried to keep my head up as the rain came down on the both of us. Finally, the ground came up under us, and the roar of the river fell away behind. The Bigfoot climbed and climbed, and then the rain quit hitting me, and I knew we'd gone in under stone. The cave, the one in the bluff, it had told me of. The Bigfoot set me down gentle on dry rock, and I folded up right there, spent and shaking with the cold. The Bigfoot went off into the dark a moment and came back with an armful of dry moss and dead branches. It built them into a little heap, and then it did a thing I never looked to see. It took up 2 stones and struck them hard together, over and over, throwing sparks down into the moss until a small flame caught and grew. I huddled up against that fire, trying to get some warmth back. My clothes were soaked clean through, and I'd started to shake in a way I couldn't stop. The Bigfoot watched me a moment, then went off again into the black of the cave. When it came back, it was carrying what looked like hides, old ones, dried stiff and cured somehow. It spread them on the stone by the fire and pointed at them. Dry, warm. I didn't need to be told twice. I peeled off the wet clothes and wrapped up in the hides. They were musty and stiff and probably hadn't been touched in years, but they were dry and they held the heat, and that was all I cared for. The Bigfoot settled down on the far side of the fire, that huge shape barely there in the shifting light. We sat like that for hours while the flood ran itself out below. Somewhere in there, I fell asleep, worn down past the fear. When I woke, the fire was still going, so the Bigfoot must have kept it fed while I slept. It was there in the same spot, watching the mouth of the cave. Gray light was coming in. The rain had passed. The Bigfoot walked me down to the house in the morning. The wreck of it was worse than I'd let myself believe in the dark. The river had gone back down inside its banks, but it had taken the low corner clean off, floor and wall, and a good third of the roof, and left a foot of silt and gravel through what was left. My garden was gone under a sheet of river mud. Half of what I owned had washed away or spoiled. I stood there looking at it, trying to work out where to even start. I had some tarps, some tools, a few nails. I could maybe close it up enough to live in, but it was going to take weeks, and I was already worn to nothing. The Bigfoot watched me take it in, then said, "I help, we fix." I was taken aback. The Bigfoot was offering to help me put the place back together. I tried to say it didn't have to do any such thing, but it only shook that huge head. Friend helps friend. So we worked. The Bigfoot couldn't handle a tool. Its hands were too big and too strong. It would have snapped a hammer like a matchstick. But it could lift what I never could have shifted alone. It hauled the fallen timbers and the trees the flood had jammed against the house. Hours of sawing and dragging done in minutes. It held beams up square while I nailed them home. It carried flat stones up from the bar to weigh down the tarps I stretched over the broken roof. It took us 4 days to make the place fit to live in. It wasn't pretty, and it surely wouldn't have passed any inspection, but it would turn the rain and give me a dry spot to sleep. The Bigfoot worked without stopping, without complaint, never once asking for a thing back. When we were through, I tried to thank it. I didn't have words enough for what it had done, pulling me out of the flood, giving me shelter, helping me build my life back up out of the mud. The Bigfoot only looked at me and said, "You help me, I help you, same thing." The Bigfoot was right. We'd been holding each other up all along. It had been teaching me, guarding me, showing me how to live in step with that country. And in return, I'd been learning, taking it in, treating the Bigfoot as an equal instead of a monster or a myth. Over the next few weeks, while I went on patching the house and replacing what the water had taken, the Bigfoot taught me the biggest lesson of all. We were sitting by the river one evening, watching the light go, when the Bigfoot spoke more words together than I'd ever heard from it. Men forget. They belong. The land. I asked what it meant. The Bigfoot pointed at me, then at the trees, then at the water going by. You, tree, river, all one, all tied. The Bigfoot was reaching for something it had been showing me all along. Men had forgotten they were part of the country, not set above it. We'd built our towns and our machines and talked ourselves into believing we were something apart, something better, standing over the whole of the natural world. But the Bigfoot knew otherwise. The Bigfoot said, "You, bear, tree, water, all live, all die, the circle." The Bigfoot was describing the round of living and dying, the way everything is bound to everything else. It knew this in its bones, had likely known it its whole life. But men had lost the knowing of it, and in losing it, we'd lost something we couldn't do without. I thought about my life before I ever came to that river, the grief, the noise, the sense that the whole way I was living had gone wrong somewhere. I'd come out here to get away from it. But what I'd really needed wasn't to get away. It was to get back, to remember I was part of something a good deal bigger than myself. The Bigfoot had taught me that. Not with any lecture, but by living it in front of me every single day. It lived in perfect step with that country, taking what it needed and no more, giving every creature its due, understanding that its own life leaned on the health of the whole. I tried to tell the Bigfoot how much all of it meant to me, how far it had turned my thinking. But the words came out small, so I just sat there quiet instead, watching the light go off the water, thankful past saying to have found a thing I'd never once known I was looking for. As the fall came on and the days pulled in short, the Bigfoot kept coming by. Some days we'd spend hours together, the Bigfoot showing me things about that country I'd walked past for 8 years and never seen. Other days it would only turn up for a few minutes, look me over, make sure I was all right, then slip back into the trees. It showed me how to read the weather off the way the animals moved and the clouds came over the ridge. It showed me which berries the bears took and which they left alone. It showed me a hidden seep back in the timber where the water came up cold and clean, better than anything my creek ever gave. One day, the Bigfoot led me down to a spot on the river I'd never worked, a long, slow flat below a canyon. The bank there was thick with the bodies of spawned-out salmon, the run finished and dying the way it does every fall. It wasn't a pretty sight, and it turned my stomach a little at first. But the Bigfoot swept a hand over the whole of it and said, "Death, life, one thing." It showed me the eagles working the bar, the bears coming down at dusk, the way the whole country for miles around fed off that dying run. It showed me how the carcasses hauled up into the trees by the bears would rot down and feed the very timber the salmon had been born under. Death wasn't an ending, the Bigfoot was saying. Death was only another turn of the wheel, feeding what came next. The Bigfoot took me to another place where a beaver had felled a big cottonwood across a side channel years before. The trunk was gone soft with rot, furred over with moss and fungus, riddled with the holes of insects and the small things that fed on them. The Bigfoot pointed at it and said, "Tree dead, tree still feeds." The fallen tree was holding up a whole small world. Mushrooms and beetles and mice, still doing its work in that country, even in death, still giving. These weren't always easy things to sit with. I've been raised on human notions about death, about holding onto life at any cost, about the sorrow of things ending. But the Bigfoot was showing me another way to look at it, one that took death as natural and needed, not a thing to dread or to fight. As November came on, the cold set in for real. Snow was down on the peaks and creeping lower every week, and I knew winter was near. I started getting ready the way I always did, laying in extra wood, going over my stores, making sure I was set for the long, dark months. The Bigfoot came round less. I figured it was getting ready for winter too, wherever it was it went. Now and then I'd cross a track in the fresh snow, huge prints that couldn't have been anything else. But days would go by without a sight of the Bigfoot itself. Then one morning in the middle of the month, I woke to find it standing outside at the edge of the clearing, and the second I stepped out, I could feel that something had changed. The Bigfoot looked uneasy, weight shifting foot to foot, its eyes going again and again to the north. I asked if something was wrong. The Bigfoot looked at me and said, "I go, soon, north." My heart dropped. The Bigfoot was leaving, going back to wherever it had come from, back to its own kind in the north. I'd always known it couldn't last, that a wild thing like that was no pet and no neighbor who'd stay put forever. But knowing it didn't take the sting out of it, I asked when. The Bigfoot pointed at the sky where a low gray wall was building over the mountains. "Big snow, then I go." There was a real storm coming in the next few days. The Bigfoot would leave once it passed, heading north while the snow was deep and fresh and would take its tracks and cover them. I asked if it would come back. The Bigfoot was quiet a long while, then said, "Maybe, I do not know." I understood. The Bigfoot didn't know if it would return. Maybe it would find its people and stay. Maybe it would never come back to that country again. It wasn't going to make me a promise it couldn't keep. We spent that day together, the last one. The Bigfoot took me on a long walk through the timber, out to places I'd never been. We went to the slide slope, coming back green, to the hidden seep, to the cave in the bluff where it had pulled me from the flood. The Bigfoot was giving me these places, making sure I knew where each one was, maybe so I'd have them after it was gone. As the sun dropped, we came back to the river, to the bend where we'd first laid eyes on each other. We sat on the bank in near enough the same spots we'd taken that first evening and watched the water go dark and silver in the last of the light. The Bigfoot spoke, and this time the words came slow and careful, like it was working hard to get them right. "You, good man, you learn, now you teach. Tell them the balance." I felt the sting of tears come up. The Bigfoot was telling me to take what I've been given and pass it on, to hold on to the lessons about balance and connection and living in step with the country. It was trusting me to carry the knowing forward, maybe to teach other men what it had taught me. I promised I would. I promised I'd never forget, never slide back into the man I'd been before. The Bigfoot nodded, satisfied. Then it did a thing it had never done. It reached out and laid one huge hand on top of my head, gentle, careful, like a blessing. It held it there a moment, and I felt the weight and the warmth of it, felt the whole of what was between us. Then the Bigfoot stood and walked off into the darkening timber. It didn't look back. The storm came in 2 days later, right on the mark. It was fierce but quick, laying down 8 inches of snow in a night. When I woke and looked out, the whole country had gone white and still and new. I pulled on my boots and coat and went out, down the familiar way toward the river. The snow was deep and clean, laid smooth over everything. And there, running away from the bank toward the northern mountains, was a line of enormous tracks. I followed them the better part of a mile, as far as I could go before the ground pitched up too steep and broken to hold me. The prints ran clear and deep, striking north without a single turn. The Bigfoot was gone. I stood there in the snow, looking at those tracks going off into the far white, and I felt the two things at once. Sorrow that this thing I'd been given was over, that I might never see the Bigfoot again. And underneath it, gratitude for the whole of it, for everything the Bigfoot had taught me. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't seen the Bigfoot since. I still check for sign, tracks, a bent branch, anything that might mean it had come back. But there's been nothing. Part of me hopes the Bigfoot made it home to its people, that it's up there somewhere in the northern ranges, safe and well. Part of me hopes it'll come back down someday, that this isn't really the end of it. But mostly I'm just thankful for what happened. I came out to that river 8 years ago looking for quiet, looking to get clear of a world that had stopped making any sense to me. And I found a thing I never once looked for. A teacher, a friend, a way back to something old and wise. I've spent these last weeks turning over everything the Bigfoot taught me, trying to get it down in words. The Bigfoot never gave a lesson the way a man would, never explained or lectured. It taught by doing, by showing, by living out in front of me the very things it wanted me to learn. The biggest of them was about connection. Everything in that country is tied to everything else. The trees, the water, the animals, the very rock and soil. Nothing stands alone. Every act has its cost. Every death feeds a new life. Every ending is a beginning of something too. Men have forgotten this. We've built ourselves a world where we act like we're set apart from the land, like we can take and take without it ever coming due. But the Bigfoot knew better. It lived in balance, taking only its share, giving back as much as it drew, understanding that its own life hung on the health of the whole. The Bigfoot taught me about patience too, and about paying attention. It never rushed at life, never had to be doing or getting or chasing something. It could sit for hours and only watch, only be there in the moment. It understood there was worth in stillness, in quiet, in simply being without a single thing you were after. And the Bigfoot taught me about respect. Respect for every living thing, from the smallest bug to the biggest bear. It never counted a creature as lesser or as not worth its notice. It understood that everything had its part, that everything carried a worth of its own. They might sound like plain lessons, maybe even obvious ones. But living them, really taking them into how you move through the world the way the Bigfoot did, that's another thing altogether. That asks for a whole change in how you see the world and how you see yourself standing in it. I think about my life before that river, the grief that had hollowed me out, the feeling that something at the root of how I was living had gone wrong. I'd run out here to hide from it. What I'd needed all along was to reconnect, to remember I was part of something bigger than my own small sorrow. I'm still here in my house by the river, still living alone in that country. But everything's different now. I look at the trees a different way, listen to the water a different way, move through my days with more attention and more respect than I ever had. I think about the Bigfoot every day. I wonder where it is, what it's doing, whether it ever thinks back on our time together. I wonder if it found its people, if they took it back in, if it told them about the man it took up with down on the river. I've started keeping a journal, writing down all I can hold of my time with the Bigfoot. Partly because I want to keep these things to be sure I never lose them, but partly because the Bigfoot told me to teach others, to pass on what I'd learned. I don't know if anyone will believe me. I've got no photograph, no film. I never once thought to bring a camera when the Bigfoot was near, and even if I had, it would have felt wrong. The Bigfoot trusted me, opened itself to me, and putting a lens on that felt like a betrayal of the trust. But I have the memory, I have the lessons, I have the change in how I see the world and my own place inside it. Some evenings, when I'm sitting on the step watching the light go off the river, I think I catch movement in the trees. A big shape, familiar somehow, watching from the shadow of the timber. It's likely just my mind making what I want to see, but maybe not. Maybe the Bigfoot does come back now and then just to look in on me, to see if I'm still holding to the lessons. Maybe it's still out there, still teaching, still showing anyone willing to learn how to live in balance with the land. I hope so. Because even if I never lay eyes on the Bigfoot again, even if that November morning was truly the last of it, I know this much. The Bigfoot changed my life. It showed me another way of seeing, of being, of living. It gave me gifts I could never pay back. I know what people will think when they read this. They'll say I made it up, that I've lost my mind, that there's no such thing as a Bigfoot that talks, and I don't blame them for it. If a man had told me the story a year ago, I wouldn't have believed a word of it either. But I know what I lived through. I know what I saw, what I heard, what I learned. The Bigfoot was real. Its mind was real. The friendship we built was real. And maybe that's the biggest lesson in all of it, that the world is stranger and richer than we let ourselves believe. We think we've got it figured, think we've named and sorted the whole of it. But we haven't. There are things living in that country we don't understand, can't understand, things that live outside our neat little boxes and explanations. The Bigfoot was one of those. Not a monster, not an ape, not some missing link or dead end on a chart. It was simply a being living its life, keeping to the wisdom of I don't know how many generations behind it. It happened to cross my path, chose to teach me, and in the doing changed everything I thought I knew. I can't prove a bit of it. I've got nothing that would satisfy a scientist or a skeptic. All I've got is my story, my memory, and the deep change in how I see the world. But that's enough for me, and if even one person reads this and starts to question what they have assumed about nature, about connection, about our place in the bigger web of the living, then maybe the Bigfoot's lessons will go on spreading, rippling out like a stone dropped in still water. It's getting dark now. I ought to go in, get a fire going, put something on to eat. But I'm going to sit out here a while longer, watching the country, listening to the sounds of the evening coming down. Sometimes I talk out loud, tell the Bigfoot about my day, about things I noticed or worked out. I don't know if it can hear me. I don't know if it's within 100 miles. But it makes me feel connected, makes it feel like the friendship we built is still alive somewhere. The Bigfoot taught me that everything is tied together, that nothing ever truly ends. Things only change their shape, pass from one form into another, keep the wheel turning. Maybe that holds for what's between two beings too. Maybe the bond I made with the Bigfoot doesn't just stop because the Bigfoot isn't here. Maybe it goes on, unseen but real, tying me to something larger than myself. I hope you've read this far. I hope something in it lands with you, makes you look at the world around you a little differently. The Bigfoot wanted me to teach others, to pass on what I learned. This is me trying to honor that. Whether you believe my story or not, whether you think the Bigfoot was real or just something I dreamed up out in the timber, doesn't really matter. What matters are the lessons about connection, about balance, about living in step with the land instead of trying to break it to your will. Those lessons are real, even if you doubt the one who taught them. The light's nearly gone now. The country is settling into its night. Somewhere out there, maybe in these mountains or maybe hundreds of miles north, the Bigfoot is doing the same, settling in for the dark, living the same tied together, balanced life it always has. I'm thankful for every hour we shared. I'm thankful for every lesson the Bigfoot gave me. And I'm thankful to be here, in this place, trying every day to live up to what I learned. If you're ever out in the timber and you feel like you're being watched, if you hear a sound you can't name or catch a movement in the shadows, don't be afraid. Maybe it's only your mind, or maybe it's something more, something old and something wise, something that's been walking this land far longer than we have. And maybe, if you're lucky, it will teach you something too. The Bigfoot changed my life. It showed me a different way of seeing, of being, of living. And now I'm handing it on to you, hoping that maybe you'll carry it forward as well. That's what the Bigfoot wanted. That's what I promised. Real or fake, you decide. I was Alex, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.